Hi, everybody. It's the waitingfornextyear.com podcast. I'm your host, Craig Lindell, and this is a Driving with Craig edition of the podcast. I want to talk about everybody but the Cavaliers pretty much, but I'm going to start with the Browns. They're doing a joint practice thing with the Colts this week, which is kind of cool. It's something that the Browns haven't done a lot of in recent years. And I love the idea of the Browns defense getting a look at the Colts offense and vice versa. I think it's a really good thing for the team. It's kind of like injecting preseason games into their practices. And I know it's going to culminate in an actual preseason game, but I kind of think, at least based on what I've heard from a lot of the reporters and the quotes from the coaches, that the Browns will have extracted all the value from their joint practices with the Colts even way before that game. The game is almost anticlimactic compared to what they hope to accomplish by facing talent that is not their own roster. I love the idea. I think it's great. I'm very happy that the Browns are doing it. But it, like so many things that happen with these Browns, it makes me think about the way I talked about the Browns in the past. And I used to be one of these kind of, well, I don't care about remaining healthy. I mean, I do care about remaining healthy, but this team needs reps in preseason games. And that was true. I would say that a lot when it was DeShone Kizer, Colt McCoy, name the quarterback and the coach. They're installing Pat Shurmur's offense, or Mike Pettin has a new offensive coordinator. They need as many reps as possible in the preseason. And now that I see this Browns team with the amount of talent that they have, it's starting to make me feel a little bit sheepish about the way I used to talk about the old Browns. I feel a little bit bashful that maybe I was just totally wrong and I was covering up for the fact that this team just didn't have any talent. Because now that the Browns have talented players like Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. and Baker Mayfield, I kind of would prefer if they didn't play any snaps in the preseason at all. Like if it's playing a lot or playing none at all, I would say play none at all. And I'm sure Freddie Kitchens will split the difference and they'll play a little bit, kind of like they did last week with one drive. But I no longer value reps in preseason the way I once did. And that's because the health of players like Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry is far more important than the chemistry that can be gained by playing a meaningless quarter of football in the preseason. And so maybe I was right all along, though. Maybe I knew what I knew about those Browns teams, but it really seems foolish because I talk a lot about the fact that without talent, the missing ingredient for a lot of these teams is not more reps. It's not more time. It's not more experience. Colt McCoy and DeShone Kizer the missing ingredient for those guys wasn't more time. They could have gotten marginally better, but their peak was always going to be way too low. Always. And now that the Browns have guys where I think the peak of these guys actually is deep playoff runs and maybe eventually, if they're lucky enough to win a Super Bowl, now I don't want them to waste their time trying to get reps in preseason. The risk of getting injured, the risk of losing Odell Beckham Jr. for significant amounts of time, or even Nick Chubb, who's coming into his second year, the risk, and yes, the risk exists playing in the regular season too, but that's at least a risk worth taking because that game counts. That's a game that could be the difference between making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. And if somebody gets hurt in a meaningful game, okay, so be it. I'm not sure what this does to my opinion of, and it's ironic that the Browns are facing the Colts this week. I'm not sure what this does to my opinion of the Colts sitting Peyton Manning way back when when Derek Anderson was the Browns quarterback, and a win by the Colts would have put the Browns in the playoffs, and they decided to sit Peyton Manning and basically gave a game away, and the Browns missed the playoffs in one of their best seasons since 1999. So new me, why would I care about the Browns? Why would I care about anything but my own team, my own talented team? So I'm not ready to dive into that. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But it's just interesting. It's interesting how your philosophies can change, or how you feel like you've got a philosophy, and then all of a sudden, once your team has a quarterback and brings in high-level, high-profile talent, how your opinion could change. And my opinions and my philosophies feel like they're very, very fluid nowadays compared to where they used to be. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought it was locked in. But Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham Jr. and all these guys have me rethinking a lot of things. A lot of things. All right. Let's move on to the Indians. The Indians are playing a brutal stretch of their schedule. Just brutal. And they lost 2 to the Red Sox this week. And they're headed to New York, and things are looking ugly. And from a 10,000-foot view, it's scary, because nobody wants to peak at the wrong time. Back when they won 22 games and they were going for records, it felt like they peaked, and they peaked too early. And that series in Minnesota where the Indians won 3 out of 4 and sat alone in first place, that seemed like a peak. And I'm hoping that we don't look back on this time and this team and this season and think that was the peak for this team, because I'm certainly hopeful that they can do better. And there are some things working against them. They inherited a suspension with Yasiel Puig, which he has been serving during this. If the Indians did peak with taking first place, they had some headwind. It wasn't all their fault. Yeah, the schedule stinks, and they lost Yasiel Puig, which was a key part of the Trevor Bauer deal, at least for this season. But I'm still hopeful. I think that they can fight it out for a wild card, or maybe even the division. But it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. I want to just be thankful that they gave us a really meaningful run of baseball. There were times this year where I didn't think we'd get any meaningful baseball, and so it makes me happy. I'm not going to say I'm satisfied with it. There was once a time where I was satisfied with the Indians getting as far as they did against the Cubs and almost winning the World Series. And Todd Derry warned me about this, and he was ahead of the curve, at least compared to me on this. He realized what a lost opportunity that was, and I naively thought that we were at the beginning of a window and that the Indians were going to challenge for the World Series pretty much every year, that wasn't the peak. But scary enough, that might have been the peak. And that missed opportunity has eaten away at me more and more as time has gone on. I actually despise Cubs fans more today than I probably did then, which is saying a lot. Just saying an awful lot. I've gotten more bitter with time. More bitter. Not less. And that, if you'd asked me, first of all, I wasn't overly bitter when the Indians lost. It sucked and it stung, but it felt like it was the beginning of something. And ever since then, it's starting to feel like that was the end of a magical run in some ways, because the Indians haven't been able to follow it up. So yeah, I'm just not even sure. Just not even sure what to think anymore about the Indians. But I haven't given up hope on this season. Obviously, I think they've got tons of potential, and I hope they can live up to it. I just really hope they can live up to it and manage to fight back. They really put themselves in a hole, and They were able to fight their way out, but the schedule is such that it's going to be really tough. It's still going to be really a tough task for them. And then once they do make the playoffs, it's that much tougher. But there are a lot of good storylines, a lot of good potential storylines. I just hope that, as I said, I hope we haven't reached the culmination of all those storylines. The last thing I want to talk about today is Stipe Miocic, Cleveland's champ heavyweight fighter, is getting a rematch finally after basically just over a year, I think. I think he lost the belt last July, got caught in the clinch by Daniel Cormier. Who caught him in the clinch and hit him with an uppercut. Stipe left himself open coming out of that clinch, and that's how fast things can happen in the UFC, especially in the heavyweight division. And it's been a cluster ever since. It's been very frustrating as a Stipe fan, as a Stipe homer, that it should have been one of the most natural rematches of all time, because Stipe defended the heavyweight title more times than anybody in the history of the division. One of the most decorated, if not the most decorated heavyweight of all time. He gets caught. He loses the belt. He doesn't even get interviewed after the fight because Brock Lesnar jumps in the ring and they start promoting some super fight. And the disrespect of Stipe Miocic was prevalent ever since. Cormier was not they didn't put pressure on him to take a rematch with Stipe. He fought Derek Lewis or something. He's not. There were no rumors even. And Stipe is not a guy who's ever ducked a fight. He's never ducked. He's always done kind of what the UFC wanted him to do. And that, I understand the UFC's business, and they're in it to sell pay-per-views, and they're in it to do big business and big box office draw. So I even understand it. But it's been very frustrating, because if anybody ever deserved a rematch, it was Stipe Miocic, and they just wouldn't give it to him. Because Stipe is not electric on the mic, and he doesn't have the most charisma. He's not Conor McGregor. And I'm not bashing him for it. I'm really not. But it's a fact. I mean, it's something that we know. We know this about Stipe. He knows this about himself. He's got a very good story all by itself, but it's not controversial. It doesn't pit people against each other, and apparently it doesn't sell pay-per-views. Fine. You can, if you want to criticize Stipe for that, be my guest, but it's not anything that he's choosing to do. It's not malicious. It's who he is. And who he is good enough. And who he is one of the most decorated heavyweights in the history of the organization. What he is a stand-up guy who, at least as far as I know, has passed every drug test he's ever taken, never been linked to PEDs. Same with Cormier, by the way. So it's not Stipe's fault, and it's, yes, it would be better if he had all the charisma and the ability to sell a fight other than with just his fighting skills. But I know part of the UFC's job is to maximize revenue, but the other part is to recognize the most talented fighters in the world. And Stipe is an example where they just don't get it all. They don't get Brock Lesnar levels of excitement out of Stipe. And I understand why it would be better for them if they did. But they have a responsibility to the belt, to their history, to a guy who defended the title, who took every fight they ever asked him to take on his way to winning the belt, to a guy who went into Brazil in really, really unfriendly territory to win that belt, they have a responsibility to him too, not just their bottom line. And the fact that it took this long for him to get that rematch, it's offensive. It's obnoxious. And here's to hoping Stipe sticks it right in their ear. I don't know why. I didn't feel like swearing there. He needs to stick it to them. And the only way you can do that is by avenging his loss, winning back that belt, and forcing them to schedule whoever they feel like against him, whether it's a rematch with Francis Ngannou, whether it's the rubber match rematch with Daniel Cormier a third time. The only way he can do that is by winning the belt. That would be the perfect storyline for me as a Stipe homer, and for many of you listening. I don't even know what Vegas has this thing ranked, but Stipe was not an underdog the first time they faced. These things have a tendency to flip because whoever won last, everybody can't imagine them losing. You know, nobody can imagine Daniel Cormier losing because the most recent memory is him beating Derek Lewis and beating Stipe before that. So I don't know what Vegas is saying about this fight, but obviously you know where my rooting interest lies, and I hope beyond hope that that's the story we get to wake up to on Sunday morning, that we get to experience on Saturday night, wake up to Sunday morning. That's obviously what I'm hoping for. So thanks so much for listening. I'll probably try and check in again with you guys soon after that fight and after the Browns' next preseason game against the Colts. Hopefully the Indians are winning games by the time you're listening to this as opposed to losing to the Red Sox. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time. It's been the waitingfornextyear.com podcast.